Black Saints for Black History Month, Monday Musings. Well, we're in the midst of a pretty significant snowstorm, and February is, in the United States, is Black History Month, and so because of that, we're just going to talk about some Black Saints for Black History Month. Racism, before we even get to that, racism certainly is something that continues to affect our country, and even globally. So it is something that the church speaks out strongly against, because all people are created in the image and likeness of God, regardless of their skin color. And so the church has been clear on that throughout history, and also most recently in the Second Vatican Council, and also in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Pope Francis, when we celebrated Martin Luther King Day this past January, Pope Francis sent a message to Bernice King, who was Dr. Martin Luther King's daughter. And in that message, he said, "In today's world, which increasingly faces the challenges of social injustice, division, and conflict that hinder the realization of the common good, Dr. King's dream of harmony and equality for all people, attained through nonviolent and peaceful means, remains ever timely." Important, the church in Africa has, in the early church in particular, had significant growth. So the church has been in Africa really since the beginning of Christianity. And even in the scriptures, we see that the first individual baptism, obviously there were lots of baptisms in scripture, but the first time an individual was baptized, that we have recorded in the scripture, was to an Ethiopian eunuch. If you want to read that, that's in Acts chapter 8, 26 through 40. As racial slavery began to grow in the 15th century, there began to be important papal denunciations of that, and also threats of excommunication as early as 1435, and then that was reiterated after that. Pope Pius IX, which has apparently become more popular, he proclaimed St. Joseph patron of the Universal Church, and that happened 150 years ago, which is why we celebrated the anniversary of St. Joseph being proclaimed patron of the Universal Church. And so with that is why Pope Francis declared the year that we're currently in as the Year of St. Joseph. Pope Pius IX, there was this pastoral letter on slavery that was apparently not in accordance with Catholic teaching, and so because of that, Pope Pius IX actually placed that pastoral letter on the Index of Forbidden Books. Again, the church in Africa did grow significantly in the early church. It was did actually lessen. That was primarily because of the Muslim invasion of Africa, and some actually say kind of uniquely that Muslim could actually be a Christian heresy, not another religion, another topic. But there's actually there was a study that said by the year 2050, so ways from now, 5 of the 10 countries with the largest Christian populations will be in Africa. So the church grew largely in Africa in the early church, and it certainly is experiencing a strong renaissance, I guess, if you will, in the time period that we're currently living in. So now we'll just talk about some Black Saints for Black History Month. Obviously, there's many saints, many Black Saints. Can't go through all of them, so there's just a couple of the more popular of the Black Saints for Black History Month. Always important for us to be aware. There's nothing boring about the lives of the saints. I'm only going to mention, a couple brief things about these saints, but the saints' lives were never boring, even though they were saintly. It certainly didn't mean their lives were boring. So we have Saints Perpetua and Felicity. They were Christian martyrs during the early persecution of the church in Africa. Perpetua was an educated noblewoman and made the decision to follow her mother and become a Christian, even though she was aware that that could mean that she would be put to death because of that. And her pagan father actually tried to talk her out of it, and she asked her father, "See that pot lying there? Can you call it by any other name than what it is?" Her father then answered, "Of course not." She replied, "Neither can I call myself by any other name than what I am, a Christian." And her father then attacked her. Actually, her statement there was not surprising. She was a noblewoman. It's actually a pretty deeply philosophical statement there. And as her father attacked her, because of that, it's always important for us to be aware that the faith does cause people to do strange things, both for good and evil. She was baptized before being taken into prison, and the judge tried to persuade her to renounce her faith, and when she remained firm in that, she was sentenced with others to be thrown to the wild beast in an arena. Saint Felicity, she was a slave woman, and she was an expectant mother, and when she was, after giving birth, she said, a very painful labor for her, very painful childbirth for her, she said, "Now I'm the one who is suffering, but in the arena another will be suffering for me, because I will be suffering for him." Because of this, she's the patron saint of because of that. She's the patron saint of widows, and always important, Perpetua being a noblewoman, and Felicity not so much. It's kind of unique how the saints, often come in contact with each other, and in particular how, we see how the faith does bring people from varying backgrounds together with each other. St. Charles Lawanga, he was from Uganda, and the ruler was making sexual advances towards the young pages at that time, and because of that he tried to protect them from that so that they could remain chaste. And when he was in prison, he would instruct those young pages in the Catholic faith, and because he would not stop what he was doing, he was burned to death for that. St. Josephine Bakhita, she was born in the Darfur region of southern Sudan. She was kidnapped at the age of 7 and sold as a slave, and then she would go on to be sold numerous times as a slave, treated poorly even because of that. And she was eventually brought to Italy, and she was placed in the custody of the Canossian sisters in Venice. When she was baptized, she took the name of Josephine. Prominent, we're in the year of St. Joseph. Josephine is obviously the feminine of Joseph. And when they wanted to take her back to Africa as a slave, she refused, and the Canossian sisters and the Patriarch of Venice intervened on her behalf. And eventually she would go on to take vows as a Canossian sister. Whenever time she was asked how she was how she was doing, she would always say, "As the Master desires." Her last words were, "Our Lady, Our Lady." I'm not sure what I'm choking on. St. Martin de Porres, he was the first Black American saint, not American as in U.S., America as in North America, South America, was the first Black American saint. He was born in Peru to a Spanish nobleman and a young freed slave. He apprenticed as a barber. Then he took a job in the Dominican priory, and he did so well at that Dominicans would call him the Saint of the Broom. His devotion was so strong, and he wanted to become a Dominican. And at that time in Peru, the Dominicans had a stipulation that blacks couldn't join their order, and because of his devotion, the order dropped that stipulation and allowed him to be vested in the habit and become a Dominican brother. Always unique how the saints do, through their means, are able to do probably much more than we're able to do. He would go on to establish an orphanage for poor children in the slums. He even set up a shelter for stray cats and dogs and would nurse them back to health, took care of slaves from Africa, and was known as, had a lot of healing abilities, which was from his medical skills, and if I'm not mistaken, he was a surgeon. There's Venerable Pierre Toussaint. He was born in Haiti, and when he was in Haiti, his slave master allowed his grandmother to teach him to read and write. He would eventually come to New York City as a slave, and he would apprentice as a hairdresser, and he would be a hairdresser in some of the homes of the most rich and influential women in New York City. He went to daily mass at St. Peter's Church on Barclay Street, which is also where St. Elizabeth Ann Seton went to church. Kind of interesting always with the saints, even when they don't intersect in time, sometimes they intersect in places. So him and his wife, he was freed, him and his wife as a slave, him and his wife would open a home for orphanage, open their home to orphans, and they would educate them. He's currently buried in St. Patrick's Cathedral, so if you're ever there, you can see the remains and pray to the remains of Blessed Pierre Toussaint. Venerable, if I'm not mistaken, Venerable Augustus Tolton, he's the first Black priest of the United States, and he was a former slave, then was baptized as a Catholic, raised as a Catholic. When he wanted to become a priest, all of the American seminaries rejected him, and so he would go on to study in Rome so that he could become a priest, and then would be, after that, was sent to America and is the first Black priest of the United States, and is now on the way to canonization. St. Moses the Black, he was from Ethiopia, and he was known for his great strength and his physical ability, and he belonged actually to a band of professional thieves and robbers. And when he feared death because of his lifestyle, he fled to the desert, and the only people there were some poor hermits, and they converted him to the Catholic faith, and he would go on to join the Hermitage and even took on a leadership role in the Hermitage. There's St. Benedict the Moor. He was born in Sicily, and he was the son of slave parents and was freed at an early age. He was insulted because of the color of his skin, and there was a group of Franciscan hermits who noticed how he didn't respond to them, how he responded in humility, and so they invited him to join their hermitage. He did, and he would even go on to be a leader in that order. There were actually 3 popes in the early church who were born in North Africa, so apparently we've already had African popes: Pope Saint Victor I, Pope Saint Miltiades, I didn't say that right, Pope Saint Gelasius I. Gotta go, Monday Musings, Black Saints.